Welcome to Bruce Hurwitz Presents Meet the Experts. I'm your host, Bruce Hurwitz of Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. You can find us on the web at hsstaffing.com. I hope you consider us for all your staffing, career counseling, and speech writing needs. I am delighted to be joined today by Jan Cavelle. We will be discussing the first steps to scale from $1 to $10 million. Meet the Experts is sponsored by P&K CPAs. P&K is a full-service accounting firm. They provide accounting and consulting services to businesses ranging from startups to small and mid-cap companies to nonprofits, as well as high-net-worth individuals. Contact them today for a free consultation at pk-cpas.com or call them at 973-882-8810. They will be happy to be of service. Jan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much indeed, Bruce. Well, apologies for that wave just as I came on. A fly chose to land on my face just at the moment I was saying hello to you, but it's lovely to be here.
Well, I was about to mention that you are, since the show has become video and not audio, you are my first, well, no, that's not true. I had a Canadian guest, so you're my first British guest. And since there's a fly, I can now say that I have had human beings, a cat, and a fly on my show.
Well, there you are, Bruce. Your fame knows no bounds.
International and multi-species.
Indeed.
So our topic again is scaling from $1 to $10 million. Before we get started, why don't you introduce yourself, please, to our viewers?
That's very kind, Bruce, and to you and all your lovely viewers and listeners. I am Jan Cavelle. As you can hear, I'm from the UK. And as you can probably see, I've had a long career, and that's been in starting and growing businesses, some with success and some with less success. And it taught me a great deal about what to do and also what not to do. And so finally, when I had a theory that I would retire, I thought, well, I will go back to my writing, which had always been a side thing I did, and I'll try and investigate this whole thing a bit further, why some businesses cruise through scaling, but the majority get very stuck. And which I had experienced so much. And so I talked to an awful lot of people and put together a book on the subject, which hopefully will help other people not get stuck. So it's become my little sort of niche of expertise as such.
And as you're aware, at the end of the show, I have a slide that shows the book. But in the meantime, this reminds me of an idiotic panel that I was on many, many years ago when I was a fundraiser. And I don't remember the exact circumstances, but there was a gentleman from Canada, myself, and another speaker. And that other speaker made the comment that the person from Canada had it easier than we did in the States because for fundraising, because the Canadian dollar was worth less than the American dollar. So it was easier to ask a Canadian for $1 million than it was an American. And I remember the Canadian, and I'm also Canadian, he looked at me, I looked at her, and then we sort of explained that when you earn your money in a certain currency, it doesn't matter what its value is in relation to another currency, because that's what you're working with. It was just, it was beyond idiotic. So there's no difference between going from $1 million to $10 million or 1 million pounds to 10 million pounds. But is there a difference between going from let's say, $100,000 or pounds to $1 million?
Yes, it's the simple answer to that. I think that's a big one. You know, when you first start up and, you know, the 100,000 seems like a million miles away. And, you know, then all of a sudden, if things go well, you get on a roll and you get there and you settle into something moderately familiar from that up to maybe the million point. It's quite difficult. The publishers, as they do, wanted to sort of pin this down to what you were saying about figures, and which was even more challenging because, of course, the book was being published in various countries to generalize. So it does depend a bit on sector, I think. I don't know if you'll agree, but I think obviously some sectors that sort of change happens earlier. So for others, it happens later, but, you know, so it's approximate. But up to that point, yeah, it's fairly familiar. You're growing more of the same in more of the same ways. And when you're starting to think about sustainable growth from roughly $1 million up, but you might be planning it earlier, you're planning to metamorphosize, could say it, that company into something very, very different. It's not more of the same anymore. And I think what's perhaps one of the first mistakes we all make is we drift on because we've been doing more of the same up till that point, and we assume it will be just the same, and it doesn't work, because you have to create something entirely different in so many ways, which takes a lot of planning, strategy, and change.
Now, is there a difference between scaling in the amount of revenue and, let's say, scaling in the number of employees you have?
Again, yes, I think very much so, because of course that affects, well, affects a lot of things. I mean, if you're needing to bring in a lot of employees because it's very labor intensive what you're doing, then you're going to have to bring in layers of management to manage those employees. And that's a costly business and a difficult thing to do.
But what if with automation, you can go from $1 to $10 million and you only need a couple more people because you're bringing in robots?
It sounds wonderful to me. You know, to be honest, I mean, I think people is the most challenging thing of all about growing a business. You know, I'm not saying that people aren't wonderful. I love people and interaction with people, but actually to develop yourself as a leader who can manage people and to find the right ones, it's the hardest trick, I think, of the lot of scaling up. So yeah, I'm all for robots.
What do you need? Now let's just go back to dollars and cents. What do you need in order to scale?
It's not, well, yes, you do need dollars and cents, of course.
No,
you might go for the bootstrapped.
Instead of, I'm not referring now to what do you need in order to go from 100 to 1,000 employees. What does it take in order to build a business that's reached that level where you want to scale up by a factor of 10 or 100?
Indeed. I mean, I remember somebody saying to me actually that if you can do, you know, 10, you can probably do 200, because, you know, much as if you've done one, you can do, or 100,000, you can do 1 million. You know, you settle down into a new, after the 10, you settle down into a new pattern where it is a bit more of the same again. But yeah, it's unfamiliar territory. So what do you need? You need planning, most of all, because it stops you doing this drift of more, and it starts you getting into planning it properly. Now, firstly, that affects your finances, because however you're going to finance it, be it with other people's money or by bootstrapping, it's got to be planned out, and you need a feed of money coming in to match that growth, because obviously still finance, or the lack of it, is the biggest killer of all businesses. And unless you've got a ready feed, then you're going to be one of those businesses. But on the other hand, you don't want too much because you're going to be paying too much, and you don't want to be distracted either by being continually held back by lack of money. So it requires a lot of good planning to get that flow matching your speed of growth. Then you've got, going back to the people, depending on whether that's a couple and your robots, or whether it's going to be lots and lots of people. Because, you know, as you more than anybody as the expert knows, finding the right people takes time. And again, another big mistake when you're growing a sustainable business is to put off hiring till you need somebody. And you're never going to get the best person if you only hire at the last minute. And indeed, I always say that you should build into your cash flow being able to get them early, so you've got plenty of time to find that absolute gem who's going to make such a big difference to your growth. Because in many ways, one of the things you're doing with that strategic growth is replacing you. Because when we're a startup, you know, the person who starts it does so many jobs and works till midnight and doesn't care and loves their baby and everything else. But of course, you know, you run out of the hours. So you know, you're going to need more yous than just the you that you started with to actually match that duplication in size. And that's going to come expensive, and it's going to come difficult to find. And without it, again, that's not going to be sustainable.
Now, as you may have recalled from your history books, there was a General Eisenhower who spent a few years in your country.
There was.
A number of decades ago. And I'm trying to remember his quote, which I used in an article I recently posted on LinkedIn about something like, plans are irrelevant, but planning is crucial.
Yes.
Now,
the
quote that I like the best actually comes from the other side, before that war, Field Marshal Moltke, who said, no plan survives first contact with the enemy.
That one I know.
And the point of all of this is that whatever you plan isn't going to happen because something's going to go wrong. It could be something as silly as what happened when we first began, and I moved my computer, and because for some inexplicable reason, they put the power button on the side. I sometimes hit the power button, so the connection was lost. Could be something as silly as that. But when you're scaling, there are going to be huge problems coming up. And therefore, I would think that a crucial component for a successful scaling is adaptability and agility.
I think that's very, very true, Bruce. And that actually fits in a way with what I was saying, because you've got to have a reasonable amount of money to be adaptable and survive the unknown. But the better your team is, particularly, then you can innovate together. You know, I've seen, when I've talked to people, and I'm sure you have as well, some amazing innovations that have gone on during the pandemic, for example, people turning their hands to all manner of things, you know, and the entrepreneurs have just sat there and gone, oh, we can't do any business, you know, have of course gone. But people who've, you know, turned their restaurants into takeaways, or, you know, taxi cabs into pizza vans, you know, amazing things. They're still going.
Well, I don't know if you have it there, but here the first new industry to come up was masks. And
Yes,
you couldn't turn on the television without seeing a commercial for this company's mask does this one does that. An entire industry came up.
absolutely. And all the distilleries turned to making hand sanitizer, I noticed. Same sort of
Yeah.
principle. Whereas, and, I'm sure some have done very well out of it. And the people who sat there probably complain it's profiteering, but it isn't. It's being innovative, as you rightly say, and surviving.
No,
They may
actually,
well go
I
back
never
to,
heard anyone say that these companies were taking advantage, that it was all they were providing a service. So a company that made, I don't know, pillows became a company that was producing masks, and a
yeah,
company that had been making undergarments to help athletes all of a sudden started producing masks. I mean, if you have cloth and a sewing machine, you can make a t-shirt or you can make a mask. Just have to
absolutely.
reconfigure, which means you have to be agile and you have to have the mentality that you're willing to accept change and go with the flow, so to speak.
Very true, very true. I mean, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are fairly good with change. I think it's one of the features of entrepreneurs, one of their strengths. They thrive on uncertainty. And I remember chatting to an old friend who I hadn't spoken to during the pandemic, only recently. And he was saying, he's in travel, which is not a good sector to be in, let's face it. But, he was saying that in the beginning, they were fighting this, they were fighting that, they had staff on furlough, and they were trying to regroup and wondering what to do, et cetera, et cetera. And, then they had to move everybody to home. And then there was a little pause and he said, but, it was quite fun. And I think there is that element with entrepreneurs, that crazy, we're going to damn well do it. But it goes with this sort of entrepreneur psyche. So that's a huge help, I think.
What company should not scale?
Well, I think companies who can't duplicate well, I think if they're too reliant, obviously, on the founder, firstly, and if their process is too specifically, I think it's, for example, if you're an artist, you can't duplicate and scale your oil paintings, you can only scale the prints. And, that's the same sort of principle. You might be able to adapt it into something that different that can be repeated in a mass way, but something very specific that requires that amount of hand brilliance and something as peculiar to an individual is not scalable, firstly.
In order to scale, does that mean you have to set up a model that includes franchises? Or
no, I don't think so. I mean, it's one way of doing it, certainly, and it's suitable for many businesses. But no, by no means, I don't think it's
you
at all
mentioned
necessary.
replicability. That's why I
Sorry?
thought of friend. You had said being able to replicate. So
Yeah, I guess. I
thought of
mean, but
franchise.
yeah, but on the other hand, if you're, for example, if you're manufacturing, manufacturing bespoke pieces is very hard to scale because you're reliant on craftsmen. If you're making bespoke lamps, you've got some very specific skill sets which may be hard to find. You can't just put it through a machine, but if you're making lamps by the thousand, then there's no reason why you can't make 10,000 with the same machines. So I think, there's literally the can it be made much more, and how individual does that talent have to be factor, firstly. And I mean, You've got the franchises. Certainly, you look at something like, some Starbucks, for example. They did a pretty amazing job, I have to say, with rolling out, and second to none. And that was just enough individuality in their whole setup to make such a great success. But they weren't completely reliant on one skill set that couldn't be replicated.
At what stage should a business owner consider, I was going to say replicability, consider scaling?
I think they should do it early. I think the earlier, the better, because for lots of reasons, because of the planning. Otherwise, they might be tempted to rush into it, and that could be fatal. I think, they should know where they're going. I think, say 500,000, if they have a very clear picture, it gives time to research the market, because that's another reason you shouldn't scale. If there's no market for your products that's going to be big enough, you're going to be in trouble unless you can think up new products and that are easily adaptable. So the thing starts with market research. You've got to be sure you've got the ability to sell more of your product somewhere, or product or service, and that takes time to do a good job on. So to really get to know that marketplace and what they need, or possibly new markets, do a little bit of blue ocean, and go looking for new, but it takes time. So I would say from 500 up is when you want to start thinking about it. Definitely.
I'm about to say something that is very political here. I don't believe it's political in the UK, but here there is a huge debate over masks, the wearing of masks. Now, you have companies, as we said earlier, who expanded their production to include masks. They've done a good job. But hopefully one day we're not going to be wearing masks anymore. So now all of that inventory goes away. So they've scaled up to, in order to do a service for the country, and in a way for the world, if they're exporting to foreign countries. They've done absolutely nothing wrong. They've done a good thing. And if they made money out of it, God bless. Now there's no demand for that anymore. So is there such a thing as scaling down and doing so in a way that doesn't hurt your business?
I think it's very difficult. I have known a couple of people who've done it, particularly actually when they've gone too fast into scaling and not been ready and found we're going to go, so the only answer is to scale down, work out what they got wrong, what they need to put in place, and then go up again. And there are some people who achieve that. To scale down successfully, I think, is a really tricky thing to do, because it's very hard on the mindset. I mean, who's going to get excited about scaling down unless you've got a clear vision to rebuild again? I think they probably need to. It's a really interesting question. I would speculate that they would need to have a clear vision of where they were going to give them the impetus to do it. And then or to sell and get out while they can, and just to adapt the company to make it a sellable thing, but simply for the owner's sake. For the rest of it, I suspect it probably depends on practicalities like leases of property and things like that. If they've been slightly foolhardy and signed up for huge leases on property, they're not going to be able to sustain that. without the business they used to do, and they are going to be in a lot of trouble. But providing they've kept themselves nice and adaptable, then yeah.
Jen, I have one last question. And as I ask it, I'm going to share a slide that shows your book. My question is this: is there anything that I have not asked you that you wish I had asked?
I guess the only thing that I would touch on for everybody who's thinking about scaling up is culture. And I would just say, culture, I'm totally with you were doing quotes, I shall match you, the culture beats strategy every time one, that culture comes first. And when you're scaling, you've got to become a leader that sets that culture and inspires everybody to come with you. And that's where you've got to really develop yourself.
Jan, I want to thank you profusely for coming on. I'm delighted that my first foreign guest on the video podcast was from Britain. I thank you.
Super honored. Thank you, Bruce.
And of course, most importantly, I wanted to thank everyone for watching. I'm Bruce Hurwitz. As always, please stay focused on success.